You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
Always brings a smile to my face, that introduction. And welcome everybody, welcome back to Warrior Creed. I'm Maajid Nawaz with my co-host brother, the infamous Usman Raja. And joining us today is George Galloway, who is here in the screen. Welcome, George. It's a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure is mine. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, we've got a lot of things to get through, and we've got so many current topics that I think you and I have, as the twist of fate may have it, have ended up seeing eye to eye on many or much of how we view the world at the moment. And let me be humble and say I'm younger than you, so I can say my eyes open to certain subject matters that perhaps you in your age and wisdom had already seen. So on that note, I want to go back on a topic that we never disagreed on in the past, and that was the invasion of Iraq, because my bro Usman here chose that particular topic to feature in your Warrior Creed trailer. We don't usually replay the trailer to kick the show off, but we're going to today because it's just such a magnificent moment and relevant, I believe, to everything we're going through today, because it's the same voices, which is why I wanted to kick off with this and have your thoughts on it. But let's just play the trailer back. Give us a second, everyone. Here is George Galloway's trailer that we put out on both all our socials, actually, and it's courtesy of Usman here that this is even possible. So thanks, bro.
Killers in the $100 billers, for real dealers that ain't got no feelings.
A million people in Iraq.
That is a separate.
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war.
George.
I mean, aside from George, the mastery in language and debate there, right? Put that aside a second. Just want to congratulate you for not letting people forget moments such as that.
Yeah.
And the reason I believe it's so important that we don't forget moments such as that and what happened. And I was in jail in Egypt when my country invaded Iraq, right? So I can tell you from a certain angle what that felt like for those of us who remember we were prisoners of conscience. We were jailed for our ideas and nothing else. We were never accused of any violence and never have been since. So if I can tell you from my experience, where voices such as yours, and I've mentioned this in my book anyway, everybody knows how I feel about those who raised their voices during the invasion of Iraq, because in prison with the who's who of jihadists and the who's who of the Islamists, including the assassins of Anwar Sadat and the founder of Jama'ah al-Islamiyya, the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, Professor Al-Bayoumi and others. He passed away, by the way. That's why I'm suddenly stopping myself, because I remember the leader of Ikhwan passed away. But anyway, all of us were caged, and we felt so appreciative for those voices that were on the streets in Britain opposing the invasion. So I needed to begin with that. Why? Because today we're witnessing a similar big lie being perpetrated by our corporatist media, being led by the same voices who have no shame and have decided not to learn the lessons of history, but have decided to repeat them in a manner that is infinitely worse because it's global. And those same voices, including Tony Blair, who I gave my time to in hope that, as I was also permitted to do by my sheikh with Usman, Sheikh Ali, permitted to do, go to the court of Pharaoh, he said, and speak the truth. So I gave my time to in the hope that people like him would change their ways and their stances and their way of looking at things. And here we are, post-COVID mandates, and the man is out again recommending identity cards for every single individual tied to our digital health records and our digital ID. He has not given up on that megalomaniacal plan of attempting to gather all of our data under the power of one authority. And we know the danger now with vaccine mandates in particular of what that kind of thinking brings. So I thought it was important to begin, first of all, just by thanking you as somebody who was in prison when Iraq was invaded for speaking in precisely opposition to the very thing that happened. This idea that we have one idea that can just colonize the world or conquer the world. I just want to express our appreciation and I mean all of us who were jailed back then in the war on terror, for voices such as yours and others who never retreated on a point of principle. And I think it's important I begin with that, because you and I have had some disagreements, but post-COVID and what I've witnessed, I want to say publicly that I'm prepared to start afresh, because what we're facing going forward is more dangerous than any petty ego or individualistic historic gripes that anyone may have, because the danger is that great. It involves all of us. So I want to salute you, sir, for the stance you took on the Iraq war. Thank you. And over to you for your reflections.
La shukra la wajib, as we say in Arabic. Don't thank me for doing my duty, but thank you for the very kind words, and to Usman for that beautiful trailer. If he's available for being engaged to make trailers, I'm his next customer. It is important that we let bygones be bygones, because the criminals that ruled the world back then still rule it. Yeah. And the commentators who cheered them on, and in some cases were complicit in fabricating a case for what has turned out to be a catastrophic lie. I always say, as Talleyrand said when told of the murder of a political rival, his secretary said, "It's a terrible crime." He said, "It's worse than a crime, it's a blunder." And of course, the invasion and occupation of Iraq was indeed a terrible crime, but it was also a blunder which achieved the precise opposite of that which the perpetrators of the crime claimed to seek. It has led to the proliferation of extremism and hatred and violence around the world. And I warned Tony Blair personally in the library corridor of the House of Commons outside the gentleman's lavatory, to be precise, that there is no Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but if you and George Bush invade, which they did 6 weeks later, there will be 100,000 Al-Qaeda in Iraq. I severely underestimated that number. And of course, the world has scarcely stopped exploding around Western countries as well as Eastern countries, Northern as well as Southern, ever since this terrible crime, this terrible blunder. And you're right to say that Blair hasn't gone away, you know. He can summon the media and the political class at will, it appears. He has not been damaged one bit amongst the rich and the powerful by the terrible crime and terrible blunder that he was co-responsible for. I argue more responsible for, because Bush had the alibi of being an imbecile. Tony Blair had no such alibi, and he has not been damaged by it. He's out there calling for the very identity card nonsense that I opposed when he raised it first, when he came into government in 1997. I spent many long hours in the chamber and on my feet opposing that measure, and he's back with it. He hasn't been chastened by the catastrophic consequences of the many wars that he led the country into. He is this very day calling for more war, this time against Iran. It doesn't matter to him whether a country is Sunni or Shia or Muslim or Christian, for that matter. He has no faith. His allegiance is to the dollar, and he is back out batting for everything that has put us in this dark place, whether it's on more and more COVID restrictions and COVID dictatorship, or identity cards, or mandatory vaccines and passports and war and sanctions. He's never changed, and neither have the people who give him the microphone.
Yeah, this is why I thought it's appropriate to kick off with this, because as you've now, I believe, precisely ended on, the same voices that were responsible for the mayhem that destabilized the Middle East and upended my life and many other Muslim lives due to the war on terror. Families were broken apart and remain till this day shattered because of what people did. Now, ultimately, those same voices are, we all, because we're instructed to be humane and merciful, gave them a chance to give up their ways and accept that perhaps we could all move on in a more humane direction. And what this COVID mandate period has demonstrated is that they are even more belligerent than they ever were in the past. And it's the very same voices, George, it's why I'm happy that you ended on that as well, because it's the very same voices that are asking for the very same things. That's the other funny thing. The ID cards, they were already asking for it. Now they're asking for it again. And except the only difference is the tech. Now they want to do it digitally, whereas prior to that, it may have been paper. But Usman, I want to bring you in here.
Yeah. Well, I was just about to say, because I was speaking to Maajid just before, George, about ended up coming across a video from 13 years ago. And one of the things that I saw was it was a video at the Frontline Club with Richard Watson. And I was watching how diplomatic I had to be. Because the thing is here, George, is like, I don't know how much you were able to look into. My background has been last 10 years, high security units of the prisons. We've reformed high-level Al-Qaeda, ISIS members who volunteer for us at the street level. I'm hoping after this we'll actually get a physical meeting and we can sit down and
over some food, George. Over some food.
Yeah, over some food.
In the East End, if you're willing.
The thing is here, George, I can make this statement. It's going to be a very bold statement. No one's got the street level legitimacy that I'm coming with and the connections within Europe, within this field of work. So I was called over to Belgium when hundreds of members of the youth went and joined ISIS over there. But the point I'm making with this is all the way through when I came into this work, it's always been the emperor's new clothes. It's always been, don't tell him he's naked, just say you might get a bit cold. Yeah. And what I've always noticed with this is the fact that we've had to tiptoe, because the problem doesn't start with Blair. Problem doesn't even start with the Sykes-Picot lines. The problem doesn't start with cutting up nations in between tribal groups. Because the thing is here, George, is that my work within the community was with Kurdish mafia members who I found out had lost family members in Khomeini's concentration camps. And I've still to meet one journalist that's ever heard of Khomeini's concentration camps for Kurds. I've still haven't. But the point I'm making with this is that we've always had to tiptoe around the subjects. And the great thing that I found that you had to do solely with this was to step forward and make points. And people were like, they weren't willing to accept the point you're making, because it's put in front of us that we have to accept the stuff. We have to accept what they would say, okay, you're against modern liberalism, you're against individuality, you're against freedom. And well, whose freedom is it? Yeah, whose social dominance hierarchy are we supporting? Because the thing is here, Georgia, we moved to an army area that bred the nail bomber. The nail bomber actually grew up a few roads from where we grew up. So, and if you remember when the nail bombings happened, they actually came to Farnborough and said that this is one of the most racist areas in the whole of the UK when they were covering the news reports. But the point with this is this thing of the racism you go through, and then even when you get up into having the conversation, you're having to tiptoe around the subject until people develop the critical thinking to have the discussion. I think we post COVID now.
There's
it's
a
like
there's a lot more of
previously
them.
the infection was under the skin, and now it's popped. And now the pus has come out, and now we're actually able to kind of speak, but still have to work within a certain right-left paradigm. Do you see what I mean? So I just wanted to make that point before we.
Let me thanks, bro. Let me bring in because it's World Cup season, and I know George, you've been following it. By the way, allow me to extend an invitation to you now, if you're interested. But another time, we could actually, if there's a game that you want to watch together, what we could do with what Usman just said is watch a game and then have some food before it or after it. Pick a place where we like in the East End to watch the game. But we can follow up that in private. But I know you follow the football. So let me begin with that one.
Football and curry is irresistible to me. So apart from the attractions of your company, I'll take that as an invitation. And
thank you, sir. Now I want
you know what? People have just heard that now. You've put that out there now, Maajid. You know how many people are going to want to turn up to that?
Yeah, well, listen. Let's start off with a nice little
that's what I'm saying.
Private one first, and then we can work upwards, you know. But I want to talk about Qatar. First of all, I just want to introduce for those that may not know, because it is important that people understand why there's so much excitement in the world for this, which people would be forgiven for not knowing, because the media is giving a very different impression, the corporatist media. But this is the first ever Muslim majority country hosting the World Cup, and so it is a big deal for those for whom Islam means something to them in their lives, for them to be able to display their culture to the world. And it's why I want to show you like one of the elements on display in the opening ceremony to the World Cup was a child sitting in the stadium with his sheikh, and children sitting before the child and the sheikh, and they were reading Surah Al-Rahman from the Quran, which is the chapter in the Quran called the Most Merciful. And so the opening ceremony for the World Cup was the recitation of the Holy Book for Muslims. Now, that may not be very meaningful for everyone who isn't a Muslim, but I can assure you that over 1 billion people on this planet, their eyes would have been swelling with tears during that moment to see what they believe is the most fundamental pillar of their culture represented on a stage as wide, as large, as humongous as the World Cup. And so that opening ceremony, I don't have the video, but I thought it'd be nice to play just what the child was reciting for everybody to hear. So if you just bear with me, I'm just going to play the audio. I don't have the video. So this would you don't need me, George, to explain this to you. You'd be aware, I'm sure. You've done a lot of work in the community, but this would be something that would fill hearts around the world with immense pride to have that moment on the world stage and have their culture represented in that way with such a beautiful passage, which essentially means the passage is evoking humankind, to never take the blessings that we all enjoy for granted, no matter how small those blessings are. And it's on that note is why I wanted to talk to you, George, about this World Cup in Qatar, because you and I have both noticed something. And what we've noticed is summed up here in your tweet. And you've written, if you didn't want to give it to a country which doesn't allow people to stagger around drunk in public, then you shouldn't have given it to Qatar. Follow Moats TV. Moats TV is obviously your show. And that's the logo that you have there in the background. Now, that's why I wanted to raise this with you, George, because it's so frustrating for me to see that division, knowing what this moment means to our communities, our families, our parents, to people in those Muslims who even admittedly, yes, who are mistreated as workers in Qatar, who come from Usman and my origin. They're South Asian workers. Let's not forget. So we're not blind to that, right? This is something which they're treating our own communities in that very difficult, hard labor kind of way. But even those Muslims, I can promise you, would their eyes would be filled with tears in that moment while the Quran was playing on the world stage in that way. And yet they would be incredulous or rather surprised to see Western media, corporatist media, reflecting the World Cup in a completely different light, in a fundamentally opposed and hostile, full of animosity. And that's why I wanted to ask you what you think of this. And clearly we see.
Well, of course, Maajid, shamefully, the BBC did not broadcast the opening ceremony. They treated us instead to people who were earning hundreds of thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money in Qatar, working for the BBC, giving us a lecture, a liberal lecture, in what they described as human rights, but which actually, when decoded, was nothing less than an Orientalist rant against the Muslim world, against Islamic mores, against the ethos, the way of life of people in the Muslim world. And if they felt like that, why did they give it to Qatar in the first place? Of course, the reason is because Qatar gave them a lot of money. Some of it illicit in brown envelopes, no doubt, but Qatar paid through the nose for this World Cup, only to discover that the people that it thought were its friends were there to sneer and to insult, to denigrate, to mock contemptuously the country, the society, the religion to which Qatar belongs. Alcohol is just one of the examples. It's illegal, I must tell you, to drink alcohol at a Scotland game in Glasgow. But you would never discern that from the treatment of the fact that Qatar doesn't allow people to drink in public at their World Cup. You can't drink alcohol at the Stade de France in Paris at a football game. But again, you would never know that from this endless sneering in defense of people who apparently can't go 90 minutes without drinking alcohol. But the whole question, for example, of LGBTQ plus rights in Qatar, of course, homosexuality is illegal in Qatar, as it is in all Muslim countries, as it is in all but one African countries, including Christian African countries. 300 Polish mayors have just declared themselves the mayors of LGBTQ plus free zones. So attitudes to gay rights are not universal, and negative attitude to these rights is scarcely exclusively a Muslim issue. But they knew all of that before they gave the World Cup to Qatar, and now they want to parade, not just, it turns out, in rainbows, but somebody was huckled today in Doha, literally walking around in a full Crusader suit, armor with the Crusader cross and so on, and wondered why the people in Qatar found that offensive. So the way in which not just Qatar, but the Arabs as a whole and the Muslims as a whole, more than 1 billion strong, are being gratuitously insulted and mocked by the liberal Western media over this World Cup is pretty hard to stomach. However, revenge was theirs today when Saudi Arabia defeated the favorite to win the World Cup, Argentina, and deservedly defeated them too. Now, for the record, and I don't need to say this to you two, but to the broader audience, not only have I got nothing to do with the regime in Saudi Arabia, I'd probably be arrested if I showed up there. Although I love the people of Saudi Arabia, and quite a few of them like me. And I am actually banned from Qatar, unlike Gary Lineker, who went there at the public's expense only in order to insult them. An organization that wanted to give me an award in Doha were pulled in by the Mukhabarat and told that if they brought me to Doha, their ceremony would be cancelled. Yeah. So I speak as someone with no axe to grind for either government in Doha or Riyadh, but I am 100% behind the people of Qatar and Saudi Arabia in the teeth of this remorseless, hypocritical, and quite repugnant onslaught of contempt and mockery.
Yeah. Well, Usman, I want to bring you in. Before I do, I want to
can I just ask one question as a very ignorant, as a seriously ignorant person? Yeah. What is the gay thing that you're going to do at the football match? Because I can't figure out, like, they talk about LGBT rights, and I'm sitting here going, what do you want to do at the football match? I mean, Muslim countries, are infamous.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, George, if we're in Pakistan and we're walking down the road, I might grab your hand and go, George, let's walk up here and carry on grabbing you. Because it's
I told you once before, we were doing that in prison. Jihadis and Islamists were holding hands interlocked. Like, this is how we walk around. This culture is very, very common.
How many times do we eat out of one plate?
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole, I've grown up on in a white underclass estate with horrendous racism, but the brotherhood of that community. Yeah. But one of the things that I found magic at the age of 16, when I was introduced to Islam through the Afro-Caribbean community in West London, was the fact that you could sit in a room, eat out of one plate, and you've got kids running around, and someone would just grab a child, give it a kiss on the cheek, and go, "Mashallah." And there was that family atmosphere, and I was like, "Oh, this whole methodology is a relational methodology about humanity, rather than looking at it as a religion." Now, the point is, as soon as we bring these labels in, and by the way, guys, if anyone wants to argue with my liberal credentials, Alex Reed's one of my fighters, and he was on the front of Gay Times magazine. 2009, Maajid.
Let's just say he has a colourful life.
Yeah, well, let's put it like this. It's like, and even when I spoke to my mum about it, my mum said to me, she goes, "Yeah, the Pakistani mums," like, "Oh, it's this idea of you can't put a label on this stuff. It's just people's companionship, whatever they're doing, whatever companionship they've got behind. There's no sexuality in the public sphere. Do not smoke in front of my child. It's got nothing to do with gay. It's got nothing to do with lesbian. It's got nothing to do with heterosexuality. It's got to do with a relational atmosphere where people hold hands, where people sit knee to knee, and you can have that intimacy without this like weird sexual barrier that's now been introduced with all of these intersectional ideas."
Bro, look, I never would have believed it until we've seen what they've started doing with children, and now it's just it's why I was actually very happy that it was a child reading the Quran in the opening ceremony, because what's going on now with the over-sexualization of children as well, your point there about trying to maintain a public space that is holistic and welcoming for all on a relational human level. It's how we grew up. I mean, look, sound nostalgic. It's going to sound nostalgic, but we would go home and my mum would say, "George, you remember these days?" My mum would say to you, she'd say, "Come home for dinner at sunset," right? And that's it. And we'd be out with no mobile phone, little kids on skateboards and BMXs, And then we literally tell by the sun and then come home. But there was no fear that anyone's just going to nab you, right? But anyway, I wanted to show something before we carry on, because Usman and George, there's some follow-up questions I want to put to you both about this, yeah? But this is my tweet on the matter. Obviously, the acronym STFU, forgive me, George, I'm about to swear, but it means shut the fuck up, right? So,
okay. I was wondering what that meant. Yeah.
right, so let me read it for everyone. Please shut the fuck up about Qatar. You have no idea how nauseatingly neo-colonial your virtue signals sound. None of you forced jab supporting, baby injecting, lockdown loving, mask mandating, science denying, transhumanist cheerleaders for globalist technocrats have any moral authority. Now, before I get to the second part of that tweet, I've touched on the COVID mandate stuff, and I think that's self-explanatory. You can't go around telling people that you're going to sack them from their jobs if they don't inject their bodies with substances that you tell them what those substances are, and they have no choice in the matter, and they got a mortgage, and you're going to sack them. As far as I'm concerned, if that's not slavery, what is, right? Because at the end of the day, you put vaccine passports up at every restaurant and cinema, and then you say, if you don't get this booster every 6 months, you will lose your job. And people have families and children living on minimum wage, and you're telling me that's not slavery? So that's self-explanatory, is why I put it in the tweet. The fact that you would need permission to fly or to enter cinemas, if you don't have the relevant number of boosters on a digital ID to prove it, you can't even enter a grocery store. That's basically technocratic slavery. But what I wanted to throw is one question to George and one to Usman. Now, Usman, before I do, let's show the second slide so George gets the relevance of that question. So this is my question to George. I added, I should also add, so the list goes on, George. I mean, I could have added onto this even what we just mentioned, child genital mutilating in the name of transgender issues, hormone blocking and all of that preposterous stuff that's been going on. But this is sufficient. You election interfering, Hunter Biden laptop denying, Ukraine warmongering, money laundering, media slaving hypocrites. So that's the full, that's the full two-part tweet. George, I'd like to ask you about that second part in particular. But Usman, for you, what I was thinking is like this criticism that's being levied at Qatar, and at the same time, how good are our relationships with Saudi Arabia, which is bombing Yemen? And that's okay, yeah, that's all right. We can continue sending them arms, but don't you dare watch a football match in Qatar. So that's where I thought I could throw to you as well. Let's go with George first. I'd love your reflections on the second part of that tweet.
Well, I did love it. In fact, I liked it. I put a heart on it on Twitter this afternoon. I didn't on the first one because I try not to swear on Twitter or like anyone else's swearing, even if it was an acronym. But it was all of it, first part and second part. Absolutely correct and eloquent. And as you say, we could have adumbrated 10 tweets, 50 tweets to highlight their hypocrisy. The CBS News today, after how many years? Probably 2, maybe 18 months of examination of Hunter Biden's laptop, have announced that it was real. It is Hunter Biden's laptop and all the stuff on it, the pornography, the drugs, but perhaps most significantly, the financial skullduggery therein is real. And of course, they knew it was real from the beginning. They just feel that they now have to say, probably because they want to shuffle Biden out, because he's a liability, 80 years old yesterday or the day before, and that's why it's now being vindicated. But they knew in advance of the presidential election that the president's son was not just a reprobate of the highest order, but was a corrupt individual up to his neck in financial malfeasance and corruption. Where? In Ukraine. And that there's a reference, in fact, hundreds of references on the laptop to the cut that has to go to the big guy. Now, some people believe, heaven forfend, that the big guy was the then vice president of the United States, now president and father of Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, the president of the United States. I personally believe that he is the big guy. And if he wants to sue me, I'll see him in court. The reality is that the entire establishment, media, security, political establishment, all the lovies, all the liberals, all the so-called progressives, all the so-called leftists, called this Russian disinformation. But it was all true. It had nothing to do with Russia and wasn't disinformation. The disinformation was theirs. It was American disinformation to stop Trump winning the presidential second term, that he may well, in any case, have won and may well now win in 2024. That tells me so much about the nature of the power in our countries and about the nature of the Ukraine conflict, which has dragged the world to the threshold of World War III, with all the thermonuclear consequences that would entail.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, Usman, I want to ask you as well, because how do you, looking at the situation in Qatar, I mean, you've mentioned the whole idea about labels, but politically as well. You know, we know what's happening in Yemen.
Look,
you know?
the problem we've got, the problem we've got when we're talking about something is this idea of, like, I can be talking about Saudi Arabia, for example, and saying, if I used the analogy of Vatican City, you couldn't go into Vatican City and start destroying monuments that have been there for 500 years, But the Saudis have gone into Mecca and destroyed houses that belong to the Prophet and his companions. They've destroyed the entire history and built the worst Las Vegas style hotels and they've actually
in the Holy Land.
Don't even know about this.
In the Holy Land. You know?
They took the Kaaba apart.
To the point, George, and you would have heard some of this from others, but people like Usman and I feel estranged from our history because of what the Saudi regime has done to the history inside Mecca.
But this is the problem we got, because let's look at the language. It's not even our history, it's everyone's history.
Yeah.
Because the problem we've got with this is, if I start speaking, it's another one of those bloody Muslims again. They're always the victims. Yep. And then if you speak to a Jewish person and we try and discuss something that's going on in the Middle East, we'll look at how sly I am with my language. If we try and discuss what's going on in the Middle East, we might get accused of anti-Semitism. So they're the victim, But then you speak to someone in Europe and they're like, oh, we're the victims because you got the bloody asylum seekers coming over. So everyone's the victim, But the problem is, when it actually comes down to it, and we were talking about this thing, about the reality of what's going on, the realities of what's going on with this. The Saudi regime has purposely destroyed history so it can rewrite history, and it's killing the Yemenis on its border. Even with Qatar, we can. The football thing's fine, but it's and even the surface level representation of what Islam is fine. But what we get with this is, when it comes to any point about Muslims, and I'll still stick to this, but when it comes to any point about Muslims, a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old Syrian child can drown in the Channel, and you get guys that, because this is what I was doing, George. When I was going into prisons and sitting down with guys that were accused of being part of ISIS, they were like, when I went there, ISIS didn't exist. I went there to fight Assad's regime, which, by the way, was supported by Putin, But then come the last couple of years, it's been, go to Ukraine and fight. So you can be a foreign fighter going to Ukraine, but also
and joining Nazis, by the way. And they're not as of Nazis, that's fine.
But not just that, Maajid. The other point with this is, if you've got a free room in your house we'll send you some Ukrainians over. And I'm like, okay,
Shamil Beg can't even get back in the country.
No, but the problem with this is, okay, you could say, okay, you maybe Ukrainians are educated. Remember, I'm coming from a problem-solving perspective here. I don't get into the group thing, yeah? Like my sheikh taught me, if I cut my finger, I bleed. If I cut down all the trees on the planet, I suffocate to death. That's my sheikh behind me in the green
above his
turban
head,
there.
George. Above his head.
Above my head there, George.
Yeah.
Sheikh Ali Qadri goes back to, he's got a son going all the way back to Imam Ali, historically verifiably. We're not talking about one of these scholars for dollars nonsense. We're talking about
real.
We're talking about the psychological Islamic behavioral science that Rene Guénon talked about that influenced Dugan, Bannon, and the rest of these guys. Do you see what I mean? So, but the point I'm making with this is, if you're looking at Syria, you know as well as I do, George, the Syrian people were seriously highly educated people. Yeah. So even in terms of refugees that would add value to a country, what happened? Yeah, if I'm going to make that argument, I'd say, okay, yeah, let's if you've got free room in your house, get the Syrians in, because you'll get more doctors, you'll get more skilled workers. But instead, when you start seeing this double standard, and you've grown up as a kid, we grew up fighting, George. So my brother still runs. My brother runs the fight gym in the middle of Aldershot Military Town. So the famous Maajid gym is run by my family. Do you see what I mean? We're a fighting family. Yeah, we earned our stripes like that. But when you earn your respect locally, but then you have to but you're constantly playing Emperor's New Clothes. Yeah, you're like watching a 4-year-old drown because it's trying to swim to shore, and people are like, these bloody asylum seekers. But yet there's that double standard there. And this is the problem we've got right now, that when it comes to the human factor, we've got this thing where we'll support the Saudi regime, which is basically legalized ISIS. And I can, if you don't mind me telling a short little story here, Maajid, I'm going to try and be very concise with this story. Yeah? Hasib Humayun, who was... I'll send you the video, George. There's a link. There's a documentary about him. Hasib was one of the... he was the video producer for Salafi Media, which were the propagators for ISIS. They were responsible for thousands of people going over to join ISIS. Hasib's father used to work in Saudi Arabia. He said that on one of the days, they normally do the executions on a Friday in a car park. They empty out the car park and they do the executions on a Friday. But he goes, but this was a Wednesday, and they were using cranes to lift cars out of this car park, yeah? Father goes to find out what's going on, and I haven't heard this story being told. It hasn't been told out in the media. What happened was there was a Saudi princess that fell in love with another Saudi aristocrat. So we're not talking about low-level normal Saudi, yeah? They fall in love in uni in the UK. They go back. The family finds out. The princess's father says, "Nope, you're not allowed to marry him." Yeah. So she cuts her hair down, dresses up as a guy, tries to get across, and gets caught on her way out. They get the guy. They get the princess. Yeah. The guy wasn't just executed. This was on a Wednesday, so they arrested them on one day in between, and then executed the guy. They tourniquet they cut his feet off, tourniquet it. They cut him into 14 pieces by tourniqueting. So cutting it off, then tourniqueting it, then cutting it off. And then the daughter had to watch this, then they drew a circle on her chest, and they shot her as a mercy to her. Yeah. This is the Saudi regime. This is what we know with Khashoggi. That's one of the things that happened outside. But yeah, the things that we don't talk about, the 14-year-old kid, the 14-year-old Shiite kid who got arrested because he was on a democracy march. And what did they do? They cut his head off, put it back on, and put it up. And he had to wait 4 years in prison for that. He had to wait 4 years until they executed him. Yeah. And yet we sit here and sponsor that horrific regime. And this doesn't, and the problem we've got with this is people conflate it with criticism of the people. The majority of the people worldwide are nice people. Everywhere you go, people want warmth, they want security, they want a full belly. I always say to people, I go, look, give everyone food, put shoes on their feet, put a roof over their head, then we can have a discussion. But until you get to that point, whatever's happening, this thing of like taking away dignity, as soon as you take away dignity, watch what happens. And I made this same point to the British government, George. For 3 years, we ran a project with the biggest success rate on the planet, which are the guys that you'll meet, George. Yeah? But the point is, we warned them, and as soon as we left, what happened? The murders happened. As soon as we left, 3 months later. Yeah, because if you don't give someone their dignity, but also on top of that fact, when you go around the world and you say, okay, you've got to accept Descartes' subject-object individuality and this liberal democracy understanding is it's default, you've got to accept it. And they're like, wait a minute, we come from a collective understanding. We don't come from an understanding where it's about individuality. And we never had this in the UK either. Remember, during the World Wars, people sent their kids into the countryside where other families took care of them. This isn't so. You have to remember, I haven't grown up in an insular Muslim community. I've grown up in what I like to say is the best of Britain, the best of the working, the white underclass in an army area, and then been brought up by the likes of Jimmy Tibbs in the boxing gym, so that East London represented Peacock's gym. So I've had that. I've had the best of both worlds with this.
Shout out to Suzanne, who you and I met last night at the.
Is she on the air? Shout out to
because she posted on Getter the photo of us all. She's at SUZ Seddon, SEDDON. But we met her last night. We had a very similar conversation with her about the old East Ends. Is why it reminded me of that.
But the thing is here, George, it's like if we look at this thing where we're talking about like ideological superiority, remember Michel Foucault, who's held up as, and I agree with Foucault's points on the prison regime and all that, but all of the Foucault and the philosophers around him were held up as these top philosophers of Western Enlightenment in the modern age. They were signatories that wanted the French government to legalize pedophilia. So we've got all of this thing where we've got this judgment that we make on the other, and yet we're told, okay, integrate, accept, and we're like, look, I'm only British, George. I've stood in a West Point military academy, and I actually said, I go, if you cut me, I'll bleed the Union Jack. Yeah. Do you understand? I've grown up. Like, my boys are part of the British Army. We stopped 3 plots in this country doing from a counter-terrorism perspective, but from a pure point of transparency, George. So what does it take?
Yeah. What does it take is a good question. Because now what we see going around, it's very evident, is it not, that nothing really does count. Nothing matters. What matters is an extension of the power grab that's been there, and it's gone doubled down. It's continuing. So George, on that note, right? And you mentioned Hunter Biden's laptop being real. before I got cancelled in my previous role on a national commercial radio platform, Talk Radio, I actually, at the time in 2020, hosted the New York Post. The comments editor from the very newspaper that broke that story, Sohrab Ahmari, at the time was the comments editor at the New York Post. He now has his own platform, and we've had him here on Warrior Creed since, so we're very happy with the conversation we had with him. And he's actually a brother, which, Usman, we forgot we should be more in touch with him. We should get him back.
Yeah.
But we hosted him at the time in LBC when everybody around the world was saying that that laptop was fake and a Russian plot or a conspiracy. And it was interesting to observe the timeline over the last 2 years as to how that went from being absolutely false and having, what's the number I recall, over 20 security experts? Or
50, over 50.
Over 50, there we are, all vouching for the fact that it was Russian disinformation. And you know, there were some of us saying, hey, hold on, maybe this thing's real. And now look at that timeline over the course of the 2 years. I remember the days when Tony Bubelinski basically put out an entire video testimony as an eyewitness saying, I was in the room when it was stated that President Joe Biden is Mr. Big Guy. And therefore, in these emails, when it says 10% for the big guy, I, as Hunter Biden's business partner, am willing to testify on the record that that is Joe Biden. And he said that, George, as you would remember, on the biggest cable TV news show in America, which was Tucker Carlson's on Fox. And so I'm astounded at how people even ever believed for once that this thing wasn't real, but nevertheless, they continued until finally the New York Post admitted first them, and now, as you've mentioned, CBS, and it's all the house of cards is gonna come crumbling down because the despicable content on that laptop will not only indict Hunter, but also Joe is in big trouble as well. But the reason I mentioned this Russian disinformation angle, George, is because I actually, a long time ago, retweeted you once. And that was because when your Twitter account was first slapped with the label, and you protested and said, hold on a minute, I'm not in the pay of anyone. Why am I being slapped with this Russian label? And before we were even beginning any conversation for this show, I actually quote tweeted you and said, the man's got a point. So that I see has continued. And how have you must have been on the receiving end of many of these sorts of slurs. And now it turns out that the laptop is real and it is Hunter Biden's and it wasn't Russian disinformation, just like so many other things, including, by the way, the alleged videotape of Trump in Moscow. None of that turned out to be real. And then we go deeper into the investigation and it turns out that all of that, what Trump refers to as Russia, 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 even after investigation, it turns out that it was there was no evidence linking anybody in the 2020 election campaign to being an agent of Russia, as was being alleged. And you've been a victim of that yourself. And so it must be frustrating to have such labels thrown at you in this way.
Well, we live in a time where lies stalk the land like giants. Yeah. And the thunder from their boots cows so many people into silence and crushes so many people underfoot. We have, if I just put it this way to you, Maajid, if Twitter had existed in 2002, 2003, someone saying that the weapons of mass destruction lie was a hoax and it was an American British disinformation campaign, one would have been banned from Twitter or from Facebook or YouTube and so on. And of course, it would not have been until after the catastrophe of the Iraq war that one would have been vindicated and presumably reinstated one day to the platform.
As is happening now to a lot of people.
Well, exactly. And a lot of people, you see, it's not the Kremlin stamp that has been falsely applied to my name on Twitter, a Twitter account which, by the way, was opened long before RT, Russia Today, even existed, and was a stamp that was applied to me after RT no longer existed. And I could not, even if I wanted to, be Russia state affiliated media. So they took the program I presented off the television and then gave me a stamp saying that I was Russia state affiliated media. But the shadow banning, algorithmic suppression, censorship, which goes with it, that is the problem. I've been being called since I was a teenager, some class of Russian. Get back to Russia. They used to shout at me in the street. Of course, it was a different Russia they meant then. It's the fact that only about 12% of my 450,000 followers on Twitter ever see my tweets. That's the problem. The cap on the number of people that can follow me, which was capped at 440,000 for months. And on the week, actually the day that Elon Musk took over and presumably loosened the censorship, it shot up by thousands in a day, making so obvious that they had been suppressing me. And they suppress other people even more dramatically. Some people, Scott Ritter, for example, a considerable military expert, is banned off Twitter. A good friend of mine, Garland Nixon, former member of the American Civil Liberties Union executive, former police officer and law enforcement official, has just been banned indefinitely on Twitter just this very day. So, of course, other people have it worse than me. And I have an audience literally of millions every single week. And that's maybe why they have not tried to put me out the game entirely, just as it were, clip my wings. But before we go on, may I just make this point, Maajid, for the record? I am wholly opposed in every particular, religiously, politically, militarily, socially, culturally. I despise ISIS and Al-Qaeda. I wish our brother well in rehabilitating some of them. I pray that he is successful. But I abhor everything about this takfiri mentality which gave rise to them. Of course, it didn't come out of nowhere, and probably time is against us in discussing where and why it did emerge. Secondly, I abhor the regime in Saudi Arabia, and I only slightly less abhor the regime in Qatar. But the attack on Qatar over this World Cup would be being mounted whoever was running Qatar. If Qatar was still a Muslim country, still an Arab country, still a country where the crowd on the opening day were singing for Palestine and for Gaza, as long as Qatar was that kind of country, whomsoever was running it, it would still be being mocked and held in contempt for the things that are good about Qatar. It's good that Qatar is an Islamic country. It's good that Qatar is an Arab country. And that's what they really object to. You know what, Maajid? They can't bear the fact that an Arab Muslim country is so wealthy. They can't bear the fact that an Arab Muslim country has control of resources that once upon a time they regarded as theirs and were theirs. You both are far too young to remember this, but older viewers will get it. The Beatles were still warm in their grave when Britain ceased to be the colonial ruler of Qatar. Britain ruled Qatar until 1971 as a colony, as a possession, and therefore all of Qatar's resources belonged to Britain until that moment. And indeed, to some extent, we still insist on our right to control what we do with it. Joe Biden went to Qatar, went to Saudi Arabia only a couple of months ago and demanded that they increase their oil and gas production to help the Western countries undo the damage they had done to themselves by their sanctioning of Russia. Both the Saudi government and the Qatari government told them no. And that, too, is one of the reasons for the enmity which exists against both governments in the West. So nothing I said should be taken as an endorsement in any way of the Saudi or Qatari regimes. But the era that we are living in is one in which the powerful in the political sphere have a revolving door with the powerful in the big tech sphere. We will not be censored on this show because it's on Getter, but we would probably be lucky for some of these passages to survive on many of the other, indeed, bigger.
No, I mean, look, that's a case in point. This is what pops up when you try and follow me on Instagram. This is an image from somebody sent this to me yesterday. Are you sure you want to follow Maajid Nawaz? This account has repeatedly posted false information that was reviewed by independent fact checkers or went against our community guidelines.
I mean, the same independent fact checkers that told us Saddam had weapons of mass destruction hidden under his bed in his presidential palaces, which were as big as Paris. Lord Robertson, the former defense minister and NATO chief, once told the House. That's right, that Saddam had a palace as big as Paris. Must have been some construction project, that one. These same independent fact checkers who told us that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation and entirely false, who now have to concede that it was entirely true and that there were no weapons of mass destruction and that the palaces were somewhat smaller than the late Her Majesty the Queen's palaces in Britain, and so on. This so-called independent fact checkers are merely legalized liars for the big tech owners. George Orwell, you know, in his first novel, Burmese Days, no, it was in a different novel. It was in Keep the Aspidistra Flying, a very fine novel, not much read. The hero of the book takes a job in the advertising industry, and he describes to his girlfriend what his job is. He said, it's just legalized lying. Advertising is legalized lying. Fact checking is legalized lying. Big tech is legalized lying. And that's what we have to struggle against, because the truth is out there. We have the technical ability, and you two are geniuses at it. I'm just good at content. I wouldn't know how to switch this computer on. I'm lucky. My wife is a very clever woman. But you two and people like you have the technical know-how. We have the content that people want to see and listen to. We just have to find ways of escaping from the dragnet of the so-called independent fact checkers.
Yes.
No, but
Before you, sorry,
on Instagram right after this show.
I want to bring us to Pakistan in a second, because and that will be our final topic. And before I do, on the Russia topic, so wrap that up, and Usman, you can come in first if you like, because you've been waiting patiently. But there's two slides I want to show you both. The first, let me begin by this one. This is tonight. The Sun newspaper has warned that blackouts could hit homes in the UK tonight, as the national grid warns it can't match demand. So that's the United Kingdom could well face blackouts tonight because of energy cuts and being unable, according to the press, who knows, unable to meet demand. I will link this to Russia in just 1 second. The link is obvious, but I want to bring in the second headline. But anecdotally, I'll take this moment to let you both know that on Saturday night, I was out with my lovely wife for dinner, and we were on a date, and I was waiting in the restaurant for her to arrive, and there was a blackout in the restaurant, and the power cut for the rest of the entire evening, and I was in the capital of the United Kingdom. There was a blackout in my restaurant, and the power never returned. We finished our, you can have snacks that don't require cooking, like olives or whatever. We finished those by candlelight, and then paid the bill and had to go somewhere else to eat. But there were the block from one side, ours was the last store, but the entire block from one side, there was a blackout. And upon being asked, because I said, listen, I commend you guys for not panicking. I said, by the way, this happens 3 or 4 times every day in Pakistan.
In Pakistan, yeah.
You know what I mean? I said, look, this is for me. This is like, it reminds me of growing up in Pakistan when my mum used to take me when I was young. And we used to have, remember the religious ceremonies by candlelight, Usman?
Yeah.
The special Lailatul Chandani Raat, yeah, the moon night, and they'd have the candles up in Chandani Raat for Ramadan, and it reminded me of all that. Anyway, the reason I mention this is because we're now being told we may have power cuts tonight. Now, this is the second slide I want to bring in, because the Times today reported that the UK has been quietly importing tens of millions worth of Russian oil. So now, Ukraine, George, and this is why I'm bringing these 2 slides in. We're going to end on this Russia conversation, and then we need to move to Pakistan. I want to bring Usman in and let him lead on the Pakistan question first. But on the Russia thing, we have been blind, thinking that we can get through this period with the warmongering that we're engaged in Ukraine. It's been reported that Boris Johnson traveled there and actually acted to obstruct the peace early. That was obvious. It was always obvious was going to happen. We'd end up in a divided Ukraine, the Russian majority, ethnically Russian section coming under the Russian sphere of influence, which, by the way, historically has been the case anyway. And that would be east of the Dnieper River, and then west of the river, they would have some form of recognition that would be Ukraine, which is what Elon Musk, after providing them Starlink, eventually proposed himself. If you go back to Radical Media, maajidnawaz.substack.com, it's something based upon early voices and indications that we recognized early on was the only way out of this without provoking World War III. So, fast forward, and Elon Musk is providing them Starlink. Suddenly he realizes, if you remember, that he then made a tweet, and the Ukrainians officials, the government Twitter accounts, began insulting the man that provided them millions upon millions worth of free tech support merely for proposing peace. But anyway, we're here now, but it's absurd to think that we went in this so blind, thinking that we wouldn't suffer with all of this, these blackouts now being warned, because we at the same time agreed to cap our carbon output to net zero by 2030, which is an insanely impossible thing to achieve. And mind you, the puppet Sunak was just in Egypt for COP26, or whatever it's called, what did they call it, 22?
Who knows? There's been so many of them.
And he's there not thinking for 1 second that in the meanwhile, we're importing, as the Times is now reporting, tens of millions worth of Russian oil. So we could have seen this coming. We could have seen this entire catastrophe coming, George. What do you think?
Well, there's a Chinese saying, that we have struggled mightily to lift a huge rock only to drop it on our own feet. And that is exactly what we have done, except you could say we've dropped it on our own head rather than our own feet. The European economies, including our own, are set to enter an ice age, not just through power cuts. And that is a startling revelation you've given us this evening, that it might start as early as tonight. But we are going into an ice age, not just in cold homes and unheated food, but mass unemployment, the closure of factories and workshops and mills, who simply will not be able to keep the wheels of industry turning in this house that I'm in, that by the grace of God is not a small house, our electric bill, and we don't have gas, has more than quadrupled from £211 per month to £1,100 per month. Now, again, by the grace of God, for the moment at least, I can pay that. But the great majority of people in this country cannot pay that, and not for long in any case. The restaurants, shops, small businesses, medium-sized businesses cannot possibly afford a quadrupling of their energy bills, and so will have to close, throwing people onto the dole who will no longer have money to spend, putting more people, therefore, out of work through more failures of business. We are entering into an economic catastrophe, all because we thought we could bludgeon the Russian economy into submission. And the exact opposite has happened. The pound, the dollar, and the euro are all now roughly equal. The pound and the euro have scarcely ever been lower in value, but the ruble is the best performing currency in the world. Everything that Russia sells, it has a buyer for other than us, either directly because the others want to buy it, or because they buy it and then sell it to Britain and other countries at an increased price, like the Times peerlessly, the paper of record, is reporting there. India has quadrupled its buy of Russian oil, not because India is using 4 times the amount, but because it is selling it on at a premium to the countries that claim they're not buying Russian oil. This is the economics of the madhouse. And it does open the question, and this is something that where we might find some measure of disagreement.
Okay.
There are many people in the world who think that our rulers are fiendishly, devilishly, conspiratorially clever. I think they are utterly, preposterously idiotic fools. Not James Bonds, but Austin Powers. Mr. Bean.
Short term.
We're run by Mr. Beans. I promise you, Maajid. I've been there up close and personal for almost 30 years in Parliament with these people. They are no James Bonds, I assure you.
Indeed. Now,
it's short-term thinking. That's what's going on.
Usman, a comment on this, but in addition, I want to, because I'm cautious of George's time, it's already been an hour and 13 minutes. So if you permit, George, last topic on Pakistan, I want to start with Usman, and then I know you've got some views on this as well. I want to, my views have been public on this, so I just want to update everyone. I know our viewers follow us on this topic of Pakistan because both Usman and I have Pakistani origin and follow Imran Khan's moves very closely, and have both publicly been in support of Imran Khan in Pakistan and against what's happened to him. So I just want to update everyone and say that the long march has resumed. The people, the Pakistani people, which is the overwhelming huge majority of Pakistanis who are backing him. And proof for that, in case you're ever wondering, is Imran Khan, after being ousted as prime minister, ostensibly punished, as he alleges, by the US State Department, and Donald Lu, who was the Undersecretary of State for Central and South Asian Affairs in the US State Department, who sent a telegram complaining that Imran Khan happened to be in Russia on the day Putin's tanks rolled into Ukraine, and said that they want him punished. And if he's not punished, then Pakistan will be punished. And this is what Imran Khan has alleged on CNN with Becky Anderson and others. This is this is out there. Well, anyway, he was ousted. He's now been leading a huge upsurge of popular uprising against the puppet government that was installed after his ousting. And that puppet government is a puppet of globalists, to be precise. And they serve the Biden administration and their own pockets. They've all been exposed in the Panama Papers and the Pandora leaks as having looted the country. And the Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif, who was there before Imran Khan, was meant to be in jail for the corruption that was exposed in the Pandora and Panama leaks. Now his brother, Shahbaz Sharif, former governor of Lahore, is the prime minister. So you can see what's happened. Imran Khan was stitched up, but he's leading a popular uprising. And after the attempted assassination on him, he's back out and the long march has resumed. And he has said that when that long march arrives at Rawalpindi, which is the big city adjacent next to the capital, Islamabad, I think it's to the northeast of the capital, but it's certainly in the northeast of the country. When he gets to Pindi, he said he will give a speech there and then join the long march to Islamabad. And they're demanding, Imran Khan's already made 3 points clear, he's demanding FIRs, which are police reports, be recorded against the Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, against the Interior Minister, and against the chief of, there was an army guy, the general, there's a chief of army that he's named, for his assassination. He's saying that he wants those three investigated for attempting to assassinate him, and he will be joining that long march towards Islamabad. But Usman, you've been in touch with some of our friends and brothers out there, and you, like I imagine George and I have some views on everything that's unfolding in Pakistan. So I just want to.
I think there's one point to make before, which is we started with the Iraq war, and yeah, even though we had 1 million people march against it in London, we went in, yeah. And then as the decades have gone by, we've had that, because part of living in a democracy is that we trust in the consensus. Yeah, we've signed up to the consensus as part of being a citizen of a democracy. But how many people would have agreed to going into Ukraine and what we're just about to face? And this is the question mark with all of this, because as the time's gone by, since from the age of 20 now to now I'm 45, you're watching it and you're going, wait a minute, I don't know anyone who's agreed to this. I don't know anyone who would have voted for this. So, and then even from that point that you said earlier, George, where we said about the guys that were ideologically motivated and went and joined either ISIS or Al-Qaeda, and although those guys were educated here, and it was easy to break down that methodology and understanding, because it was because what we had with this was that you guys are a product of the very same people you think you're attacking. You're a product of this, and actually the methodology here is a methodology of oneness and love. And that might sound naive, but it's different if I'm spending 4 hours a week with you, 4 hours a day, 2 days a week with you, every single week in your prison cell. But coming back to this point now with Pakistan and the point that Imran Khan made about, he went to Russia on the day that Russia goes into Ukraine, and he goes, look, no one's telling me that no one told me they were going into Ukraine. But at the same time, I was doing this to secure fuel and bread for my people. Yeah. Now, the problem that happens with this is, once again, we get into this thing where, I did this when we were in New York. I remember I gave you this example, Maajid, when we were training the crime commission up there, and I wrote the word humanism on the board, George. Yeah, and I wrote the word humanism. I said, "Who agrees with this?" And everyone, yeah, we all agree with this. I said, "Okay, now let's start breaking this word down. Let's start throwing a few nationalities out there." And I brought up an image that had been put up in the New York subway, attacking what was said in the Quran, because you had these Islamophobes that were able to put some posters up and do all of that. But I said, what ends up happening with this is humanism's a very selective term, where we have the people that we recognize as human and those that get othered. And all of a sudden, we've ended up with this thing where we see this world where you have to be polarized. And you're like, no. We know what you've got going on is a theater play up here. Because even when we had the COVID incident and They said, okay, you've got these factories in Wuhan, but Fauci and these guys have got money invested in those same pharmaceutical companies, and you're looking at this thing and go, okay, so we see the nation state theatre play on from one aspect, but who are the people suffering? The people on the ground. And in Pakistan right now, because I was just on the phone with, well, actually a few hours earlier with a close friend who's I consider a brother, and he was saying to me, he goes, the money that they used to survive on, the money that he said that it was easy to survive on that money and buy food for the family. He goes, that money now has to be spent just on fuel if they want to drive. And he goes, and he's in a good position. He goes, there's people literally starving. Yeah. Now the problem is that, it's like you sit back and you're okay, do I ignore this? Because I'll give an example. There was about 5 years ago, I'm walking my dog, or maybe it might be longer than that, maybe about 10 years. I'm walking my dog, and I get a picture sent to me by one of those subversive groups of a little girl who'd been they'd been hit with a bomb. She'd lost her leg. I look at the picture and it looks like my daughter. And I see it just, and it hits me, and I've got this rage that came up, George. This rage came up, and I was like, "You want to go and kill the pilot and do that?" And I was like, "Whoa, get yourself under control, son." You see what I mean? Walk. And I'm breathing. I thought to myself, you know what? This is the problem here. No one's understanding. It's like, it's hate upon hate upon hate. And what we've got to get to with this, we've got to understand that with all of us around the world right now are victims being put in intersectional niches of consumption, whether you're I always give the example to people that, look, when you start complaining about the West, always remember that during the industrial age, if you were sick and you couldn't come to the factory, your wife had to come in and work. I said, it's always been the people in power enslaving the people underneath. But it just depends how far that goes out and where those people underneath end up being. And it's interesting now with Pakistan, because you see Imran Khan, who's, you're not going to get more Western than Imran Khan, are you? You remember he was the gangster playboy back in the day, George. Do you see what I mean? He was akin to any of these, the rappers or whatever you want to say. The guy who's going out with the models and everything else. And now all of a sudden they're like, no, you might be. No, this guy's as Western as you get, as liberal as you get from that perspective. But at which point, and when he's there in the UN speaking, when he was the Prime Minister of Pakistan, when he was in the UN making those speeches, and people were sending me those speeches, I was saying to him, yeah, it's a great speech, but look at where the empty seats are. Mm. Yeah, it's just the banana republics that are sitting there listening. Yeah, because the guy from the US, the guy from Britain, the guy from Canada, the guy from France, okay, time to go get coffee. Do you see what I mean? So the stuff we've got to do, and this is the mission with this, is humanization.
Let's bring George in. Because it's also 7:25, and we'll wrap up after this as well, George, and let you go. So thank you for your time.
I'm grateful to you for that, because I do have to go, and grateful for the invitation and for your company. I'm unusually close to Pakistan. I've represented more Pakistanis in the British Parliament than any other parliamentarian has ever done. I've been involved in Pakistani politics since the late 1970s. When I was campaigning to save the life of Mr. Bhutto, the father of Benazir Bhutto, grandfather of Bilawal Bhutto, who was to be hanged by the US puppet general President Zia-ul-Haq. So that's a long time. I hold Pakistan's two highest civil awards, Hilal-e-Quaid-e-Azam, Hilal-e-Pakistan, for my work on the restoration of democracy in the first case, and my work on Kashmir in the second case.
Congratulations, by the way. I didn't know that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations.
But I've got to tell you, I never supported Imran Khan, ever. I was on another team. I spent more than 30 years at the side of the late Benazir Bhutto, and I would never have been drawn into support for Imran Khan and the PTI. But I had no alternative but to do so, because I know a US-inspired regime change operation when I see one. And I didn't struggle through the 1970s and 80s for the restoration of democracy in Pakistan to allow the US State Department to pick the government in Pakistan. And that's precisely what they did. They overthrew Imran Khan and they replaced him with a wanted list. It's like the front page of the Police Gazette. Virtually every person in the Pakistani cabinet installed by the US-inspired regime change operation, implemented by General Bajwa and the Pakistani military top brass, almost every one of them is a wanted criminal, a grand larcener, a looter of the poor people of Pakistan, to the tune of millions, at least billions at most. We don't have time to go through the level of looting that these people who've been installed in Pakistan in the place of Imran Khan. And secondly, all Imran Khan is asking for is a free and fair election. He's not asking to be reinstated, to complete his term. All he's asking for is a free and fair election, and they are terrified to give him one. And they are terrified because it looks like if it was a free and fair election, that Imran Khan would sweep the country with an overwhelming majority. And the crime families and the ancient clan and family dynastic political system in Pakistan would be swept away. For better or for worse, Imran might be a better or a worse prime minister than Shahbaz or Bilawal or whatever. It's not really my business, that. What is my business is that the people of Pakistan have the right to pick their own government, not have it picked for it by the US State Department and somebody called Anthony Blinken, who knows nothing of Pakistan or Pakistanis and cares even less. So thanks, Maajid. Thank you for the opportunity to appear on the show. I hope it's not the last time. And we'll meet up soon for food and football before the World Cup is over.
Well, that gives us a time frame, George, within which to follow up with you. So thank you very much. We're honored to have this conversation and that you gave us so much of your time. Before we go, I just want to say to everybody, this conversation went out live and exclusive on Getter. You can find it on @Maajid Nawaz on Getter. It will remain there as a video even after the live stream ends, so you can watch it back. It also gets re-released as a podcast, audio-only file. And that podcast audio-only file goes out via Radical Media, maajidnawaz.substack.com. And so those who are members, full members of Radical Media, can listen to the podcast version of this conversation. And there's no reason why such a beautiful conversation as we had today, George, should be the last. So you are always welcome back. And thank you so much. We're going to go to the same music that you saw at the beginning as an outro. Once that music begins, you're free to leave. I know you have to go. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, George. You're a legend. So
thanks, brother.
Thank you.
Now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge. quick service announcement brought to you in part by
Warriors.